Today's briefing topic is a century of green card backlog cripples the immigration system and threatens the U.S. economy. Can it be fixed? At a time when immigration and the border are in the news as the usual political tool, it's more important than ever to discuss the other issues that exist and that rarely get aired in prime time. Our panelists have worked to show us the importance of looking at the legal immigration system and its shortcomings, as well as the possible solutions. Today, we will talk about the green card backlogs and the delays in the legal immigration system that plague this country. The origins of this issue date from 100 years ago. Before that, immigration was mostly free and open, as one of our panelists will talk about. Let's move on to what's happening today. This year, only about 3% of the people who have submitted green card applications will receive permanent status. Close to 35 million applications are pending, up from 10 million in 1996. The first backlogs started a century ago when the first immigration caps were applied, and they have quickly accelerated as the immigration laws became more restrictive and complicated because of politics. Caps and quotas, processing delays, and waste of available green cards are par for the course in a system that discourages legal and orderly immigration. Experts suggest that the best solution would be to lift caps and significantly expand legal immigration, and argue that the US economy would benefit tremendously, as would the Social Security Fund. Our panel will discuss why we reached this crisis point in our legal immigration system, what the solutions are, and why the United States can easily absorb and benefit from the newly legalized population. Our speakers today are David Beer, Associate Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute; Jack Maldi, Senior Policy Analyst, Immigration and Workforce Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center; and last but not least, Cyrus Mehta, immigration lawyer and the founder of and managing partner of Cyrus T. Mehta and Partners. We ask our speakers to speak slowly for our interpreters in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean, and we ask reporters to enter questions in the chat. We will send a video of today's briefing and expanded bios with contact information to all participants later today. Our speakers are also encouraged to answer questions in the chat throughout the conference if they are able to. Anyway, so David, please go ahead. You have about 8-9 minutes for your remarks, and then we will go to questions.
Great, thanks for having me. As was mentioned, I'm David Beer, the Associate Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute. Cato Institute has been here in Washington, D.C. as a nonpartisan, nonprofit research organization dedicated to the principles of free markets, limited government, and individual liberty. We produce original research on a broad range of topics, including immigration for the last 40 years. And that's what we want to talk about today. A century of immigration restrictions. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see it. Give me the thumbs up if you can. All right.
We can.
And you know, we want to talk about the number of applications for green cards. And I wrote a paper last year that is important in that it lays out the rules to obtain a green card. And in that report, you can see, you know, a flow chart, and see if you can find your way through this flow chart and get yourself a green card. And we actually turned that flow chart into a game that you can play online. thegreencardgame.com allows you to play through the flow chart to see if you can get a green card. Now, this flow chart is super complicated, and you're like, okay, how do I get through this? Is this why there are so many pending applications for green cards? And the answer, the short answer is no. That's not why we are not approving a very high percentage of green card applications. It's rather the fact that we have caps on green cards. And this is the origins of the green card, the low green card approval rate and the backlog. And if you go back and look, 1890s, 1910s, 98% of the applicants who tried to get the equivalent, then equivalent of legal permanent residence were approved. And you can see after we imposed caps, Congress did in 1922, starting in 1922, you see that the backlog pick up and the approval rate for applications goes down. So we're measuring the approval rate as the number of approvals divided by the total number of people seeking green cards in that year. And it immediately fell, and then it fell again with the Immigration Act of 1924, sometimes called the National Origins Act, the Quota Act. It's set very low numerical limits based on country of birth, and that greatly restricted legal immigration, particularly from Eastern Europe and Asia. And then you get into the 30s. In the 30s, we basically adopted a public charge rule that would have basically banned almost all applicants. Just an incredible rate of denials in the early 30s under the Hoover and early FDR administration. And that policy was slowly phased out, but you can see the backlog responded once it was a little bit easier to get a green card approved. The backlog went up, particularly for Germany, and that's where you get Jews getting turned away and the Holocaust and all the rest during that period. This is the complete picture. This is from open borders to what we have now, which is almost closed borders. 98% approval rate down to the 3% or so that we've been around for the last few years. And you can see the incredible increase in applications in the 1990s and 2000s. What's behind that? If we break it down, it's because we've had this huge increase in applications, but the caps have remained basically the same, in terms of the amount of processing and the numerical limits. The numerical limits for those caps were originally set in 1990 in the Immigration Act of 1990. The refugee cap part of that is set by the president annually, but they always set it, far below demand. And so you can see we went from about 10 million applications to almost 35 million over the last few years. And I just want to show one chart showing the caps over time and how they change. That's the black line. The light blue is uncapped immigrants who are not subject to the cap, who can fluctuate with demand for those categories, whereas the caps are set by Congress or by the president, as was mentioned with the refugee program, and severely restrict those categories. We haven't had, as I mentioned, really any increase since the Immigration Act of 1990. And if you go back, the first cap was about 357,000 per year in 1922. And the current caps add up to a little bit more than 575,000. And so not a big increase for 100 years of growth in the world population and the US population. So who are we seeing applying for green cards? This is the breakdown. 22.2 million under the green card diversity lottery program, another 8.3 million in the family sponsored categories, employment based at 1.8 million, asylum basically the same, about 1.8, and quickly rising every month. That number, this number is a few months old now, so it's probably already at 2 million. Refugee category, 358,000. The U visa for victims of crimes at 334,000. And then Cubans, cancellation of removal and T visas are in the tens of thousands. I won't break down what all those different categories are, but looking at this over time, the diversity lottery is where you see most of the rejections. This is where most people who are seeking a green card actually try to get one through the legal immigration system. This 22.2 million last year, 0.2% of those will get a green card. That's 55,000. And the first official diversity lottery was held in 1995, and now we've had a few decades of this, and you can see the approval rate percentage going down. I mean, today having over a 1% chance of getting a diversity lottery green card would be extraordinary. That would be a major increase in legal immigration. Family-sponsored categories, 8.3 million, 8% will get a green card this year. You can see the cap you could barely even see the cap for family-sponsored green cards. The Immigration Act of 1990 updated the cap. It added 10,000, and you can't even see the increase in the cap from the 1980s going into the 1990s. And the cap, I mean, it's just insane, the number of close relatives of U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents who are waiting. The dark part of the bars are immediate relatives who are uncapped, who are waiting green cards because of processing delays, as opposed to caps. Some of these numbers, I just want to mention, some of these numbers will diverge significantly from numbers that you kind of hear thrown around. 4 million is probably the most common number you'll hear for the family-sponsored backlog. That number comes from a visa office report, and the reason why it's misleading is because there's this huge backlog of petitions, which is the start of the family-sponsored process. First, the U.S. citizen must petition for the relative, and those applications are just put in a drawer somewhere at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services to never be seen for decades because the line is so long. They don't bother adjudicating them right away in many cases. This is the employment-based system. This is going to be 8 to 9% of these cases are going to get approved next year, about 1.8 million in that backlog. This is the asylum backlog history. You can see this is one of the ones where we had a increase and then actually had a decrease at one point in the recent decades. That was because of some pretty draconian restrictions imposed on asylum in the 1990s that kind of kept that from rising. And recently, people have found their way kind of around those restrictions. The refugee program is backlog. We don't have great data, unfortunately, for recent years. Only the most recent year, 358,000 was reported waiting. The refugee program, the government controls who comes into the application pool, so they can, make the getting into the backlog much more difficult. And even still, if assuming we actually use the entire cap, 35% will get approved, we likely will only get to 100,000 of the 125,000 the president decided the cap should be, so it would be less than that 35%. The U visa backlog, these are for people who are victims of crimes, and there's an eventual path to a green card if they get approved for a U visa. Again, it's 350,000. The cap for the principal applicant, not counting their spouses and kids, are 10,000 per year. So, I mean, it's going to be 3 decades before the people applying now will get approved. I think we can assimilate these green card applicants into the U.S. You know, this is obviously would be an astounding increase in legal immigration to approve all of these people. But if you look at U.S. population growth, it's never been lower. It's down by 90% from its highs. There's no reason population-wise why we can't do it. And if you look at just the immigrant share of the U.S. population compared to Canada, in order for the U.S. to catch up, we'd have to approve a lot more than just 35 million. So this green cards, if you look at this sort of projection that I put together, where everyone who's applied right now, all 35 million, we just approve those applications. The foreign-born share would not catch up to what we're seeing in Canada. And even if we then, after the 35 million, then on an ongoing basis, increased legal immigration 5-fold over what we've seen previously, then we still wouldn't catch up to where Canada's share of their foreign-born population is. So the United States is a huge country. We can certainly welcome these people. There's good economic reasons for doing so, as will be mentioned. But you know, my view is we've had this concept of a small America that can't handle new people. But you know, this really idea is outdated. At least I think we're a large country who can handle this, and these people will contribute to America and make our country a stronger and wealthier place. So I look forward to your questions and the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you explain a little bit more about the caps? You know, what are they and who is most affected? And there's a question also in the chat from Sunita saying, you know, asking, does it make sense, you know, to keep them in place?
The caps.
Yeah, the caps.
Yeah, I mean, the caps are arbitrarily determined. I mentioned they come from the Immigration Act of 1990. They have no basis in any kind of reality. They were just what Congress negotiated back then. The president creates the refugee cap in consultation with Congress. Congress funds the processing of refugees. So there's an appropriations tie in that case, whereas most other applications, except for asylum and the other humanitarian applications, will be paid for by the applicant themselves. So there's not as much of an appropriations limit to processing there.
Yes.
I mean, in terms of I mean, it's everyone around the world is affected in one way or the other. But if you break it down by category, you know, a disproportionate number of the lottery comes from Africa. If you look at the family-sponsored category, Mexico is by far and away the largest country there, along with the Philippines, China, and India, who have large numbers of family-sponsored applicants. Employment-based, it's about 90% from India. Under the way the caps are structured, there's a country cap that is 7% of the total number issued in a year. And so Indians end up being about 50% of the people that employers want to hire on a green card. And this disparity between the 7% and the 50% who are applying ends up being 90% of the backlog being from India, and with an incredibly long wait. You know, I've estimated it for the two skilled worker categories, you're going to end up with a century-long wait effectively a lifetime wait for new applicants who are applying right now. And of course, we'll never actually see that because they'll all be dead, or they'll have dropped out, which is more likely a situation is that they'll leave.
Yeah, not to mention a lot of people die waiting for their green card as well. Don Tagala, you have a question for David? Don, do you want to ask your question? Don Tagala? Okay, I'm going to ask his question. How would a second Trump presidency impact green card processing, legal immigration in the next 4 years if he wins in November? You need to bring your crystal ball.
Oh, I mean, crystal ball, it's anybody's guess, but we saw what happened last time. He slashed visa processing by 80%. He slashed the refugee program by over 90%. I don't think there's any chance that we're not going to end up in a comparable situation. Maybe he's not quite as successful. Maybe he's more successful because he has practice at it. He knows now the most effective argument in the courts is we don't have the manpower to bother with these applications. So, and the courts just kind of roll over and accept that kind of argument in most cases. So they can just say, it's just too hard. So we don't actually have to change any official policies. We're just to reassign all of our resources to things that they're okay with and away from the ones that they want to discourage. I mean, the obliteration of the family-sponsored immigration system under Trump was probably the most pernicious and intentional. He wanted to eliminate what he called chain migration.
Yes.
First opportunity was the public charge rule, which never really came into full effect because as soon as it was rolled out, then we had COVID, and he just stopped processing family-sponsored applications at consulates around the world. But certainly the public charge rule, probably even more extreme version of that rule will come out again, which basically says if you're low income, you can't get a visa. And so that'll be, I think, the strategy. And so, yeah, I think we're in a terrible place because of Congress, but certainly the administration has a lot of discretion to make it far worse than anything we've seen so far.
Thank you, David. I'm going to move on to this next panelist, but there's a question in the chat for you there about the Einstein visa. Okay. Sure. Just answer if you can. Thank you so much, and stay around if you can, please, for more questions later. Okay, let's move on to Jack Maldi from the Bipartisan Policy Center. Jack.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks to David for that very interesting presentation. So I'm going to try and share my screen. Hopefully you guys can see my presentation. Give me a thumbs up if you can, please.
Yes.
Great. So I'm Jack Malde. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Bipartisan Policy Center. I work on immigration and workforce policy. And for those of you who don't know about the Bipartisan Policy Center, or BPC, we are a DC-based think tank, and we're a mission-focused organization helping policymakers work across party lines to craft bipartisan solutions. So we connect Republicans and Democrats. We deliver data and context, negotiating public policy, and creating space for bipartisan collaboration. And our aim is to help turn legislators' best ideas into durable laws that improve lives. So today I'm going to take you through a report that we published last year in November called Green Light to Growth, Estimating the Economic Benefits of Clearing Green Card Backlogs. So this focuses on the economics of the issue. And David took us through the history and how restrictive the annual green card limits are. And in the report, we highlight two key drivers of the green card backlogs. So firstly, it's those annual limits, creating what we call a cap-based backlog. And you can see in this diagram here that we have multiple limits. So we have a total limits, and we have specific family-based and employment-based limits. There's a diversity lottery limit, and then there are further limits even within these limits. So it's a very convoluted and restrictive system. And David mentioned as well that we have these country-specific limits. No more than 7% of the family-based and employment-based allowances can go to any one country. And the second driver of the green card backlog that we consider is the processing backlog. So this exists because agencies such as the State Department and USCIS don't have enough resources to process all of the pending cases. And I should say in our paper, we consider the family-based and employment-based green card backlogs. Obviously, there are other backlogs as well, which David ran through. So we quantify the size of these two backlogs in our paper. The data we use is as at March 2023. So these backlogs are likely to have increased since then. But we think the key takeaways from our analysis remain the same. So what we see is both employment-based and family-based backlogs reaching the millions, as David pointed out. And we find that the family-based backlog is larger than the employment-based backlog. What we also see is that the cap-based backlogs are larger than the processing backlogs, which is something David also pointed out. And this is just shows how restrictive those annual green card limits are. And in our report, we're considering two key benefits of clearing the green card backlogs. So firstly, it's important to note that many people in the backlog are currently outside of the United States. So if they receive their green cards, that allows them to enter the United States as new entrants. And that gives an economic benefit because it boosts our labor force, which is in dire need of new workers. We have workforce shortages across various industries. We have an aging population, and we need foreign workers to come into the country to bolster our workforce. And immigrants also bring skills and experience that can complement our domestic workforce. So there are productivity benefits from new entrants as well. The second key channel, so some people in the backlog are currently inside the United States. However, these people on temporary work visas face restrictions on the jobs that they can take. So the other key benefit of giving green cards to this group is to remove these labor market restrictions, allowing them to take a wider variety of jobs and to advance in their careers. And that has a productivity benefit as well. So we estimate the benefits through both of these channels. And just looking at the employment and family-based backlogs in more detail, we can see that the majority of the employment-based backlog are people currently inside the United States. So these are people on temporary status, and if they receive their green cards, that allows them to adjust to permanent status. So we estimate roughly 89% are in this category within the employment-based backlog. Within the family-based backlog, it's a different story. The majority of people are currently outside of the country. So if they receive their green cards, that allows them to enter the United States and to join our labor force. I should note that we are, when it comes to the economic analysis, we are considering only the adults in the backlog because these are the individuals that will work immediately and contribute to our economy. Now, if you are interested in the nitty-gritty of the economic methodology, I urge you to have a look at our report. I won't go into too much detail about that, but I will let you know what the final results are. So we find that if we were to hypothetically clear the employment and family-based backlogs now, that we would see trillions of dollars of GDP gains over the next 10 years. And our central estimate is that we would see $3.9 trillion of GDP gains in the next 10 years. Now, the majority of that benefit is coming from clearing the family-based backlog. That is for two reasons. Firstly, the family-based backlog is larger than the employment-based backlog, as I showed earlier. But also, a greater proportion of the family-based backlog are those outside of the country. So if they receive their green card, that allows them to enter the United States, to join our workforce, and contribute to our economy. However, clearing the employment-based backlog still has a significant economic benefit in the hundreds of billions of dollars of GDP gains over the next 10 years. Even though many of these individuals are currently inside the country, because we are enabling them to have more labor market flexibility by giving them green cards. Further research could more accurately estimate the benefits of clearing the employment-based backlog, because these individuals are likely to have higher skill levels, which we did not account for in our analysis. And a very important point is that we are considering clearing the current backlog in our analysis, not future backlogs. However, there are policy changes such as increasing annual green card limits that would clear not just current backlogs, but also future backlogs. So there are certain policy changes that may have even larger benefits than what we estimate in this report. Now, if we break down the benefit that we quantify, we see that the majority of the benefit comes from clearing the cap-based backlogs, 71%, with 29% clearing the processing backlogs. This shows just how important it is to raise those green card limits. However, it's very important to understand that we also need to provide more resources for visa processing if we are to clear either the cap-based backlog or the processing backlog. So we need both changes to the limits, but also more resources for processing if we are to actually deal with this problem. The other breakdown you see on the right here shows that the vast majority of the benefit comes from new entrants into the country rather than adjustments of status, although there is still a benefit from those adjustments. This is because of just how impactful it is to have immigration into the United States and to add to our workforce. The final part of our analysis is looking at the geographic distribution of the benefits of clearing the backlogs across the country. Now, we find that every state benefits to some degree. However, there are certain states that benefit more than others because they tend to receive more immigrants. So California, Texas, Florida, New York, these states benefit to a very, very significant degree. And in our report, we mentioned the possibility of using immigration policy to more evenly spread the benefits throughout the country. One option here is to use state-based visas, so giving states their own visa allowance that they can use to bring in the workers that they need to help their economy. And that would help spread the benefits of immigration more evenly throughout the country. Okay, thank you. I will pass over and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jack. If you can put your paper in the chat, that would be great. I want to ask you the question that some people ask me, and it's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the numbers, oh, having millions more immigrants will benefit the US economically. How? How will have millions more immigrants, millions more workers benefit the economy? Most people can grasp this. They think, oh, more people means, I don't know, they're going to take more services, which is one of the talking points. It's going to be less jobs for everyone. The pie, we're going to have to divide it by more people. Can you explain in layman's terms why this is not so?
Yeah, sure. So it's a mistaken perception that there are a fixed number of jobs in the economy. What we see is that when immigrants enter the country, that they create further jobs for US-born workers because they contribute their skills and they bring their experience that helps innovate and turbocharge our economy. And the other really key trend that we're seeing at the moment is an aging population. So we have a declining birth rate. And what that means is that our labor force, our US-born native labor force is declining. And we need immigrants to actually come in to ensure we see labor force growth. And this is important partly because we have more people in the older years of life who are dependent on federal benefits, and we need people to work and pay taxes to support those individuals. So there's both the need to have more workers in our economy to fill workforce shortages that we see in various industries, but there's also that productivity benefit we see when immigrants bring their skills and experience that complement our domestic workforce.
Thank you, Jack. There's a question in the chat by Tariq Khan. How can we raise the state-based limits? Sure, what? Did you understand the question?
Yeah, I didn't mention state-based limits. What we see at the moment is that there's a desire for new entrants into the country to go to certain areas. That's why we see such concentration in certain states like Florida, California, New York, Texas. What I was mentioning was state-based visas, which is an idea that has been introduced, which would give states their own visa allowance, and that would help spread immigrants throughout the country, which is important for not only distributing the benefits more evenly, but also because every state needs workers, and some states need workers even more than others. So that would help benefit the US economy.
Thank you, Jack. Please stay around for a little bit. I'm going to invite Cyrus Mehta to join us. He's an attorney who works directly with these people who are waiting for green cards, and he knows what the human cost is. Cyrus, can you share with us your view on this?
Thank you very much for having me. And I'm really privileged to be with esteemed co-panelists, David Beer and Jack Maldy. I do not have a PowerPoint with statistics because I'm going to talk about the human aspect of immigration. I'm a lawyer. I work in the trenches. And even though I can deal with statistics, I'm dealing with clients and people all the time. And I'm dealing with their families too, all the time. Now, David and Jack have both explained in very elaborately the backlogs in our immigration system. And especially David highlighted the backlogs in the employment-based green card system, especially for Indian-born beneficiaries. He has estimated that the backlog could be a lifetime, a century, which is unbelievable. For new people who are filing for green cards today, who are being sponsored by employers because of their skills. They've come in on temporary visas like an H-1. And prior to that, they came as students, foreign students graduated from top US universities. And when they get sponsored for a green card, they're in these backlogs that will last forever. And it's frustrating, to say the least. Even though they can remain in the US legally, it's difficult to remain in status, getting extension after extension after extension. But there is frustration because at the end of this whole process, they continue to remain non-immigrants, bound to employers, and in the process, the US loses, and many of these people get frustrated and go to other countries. The United States is not the only game in town. There are other countries that offer much more attractive immigration benefits and systems. And Canada next door is, of course, trying to attract the folks here who don't get their green cards, who get capped out of the H-1B visas. And so the US may not be able to maintain its leadership in the world with respect to attracting the best and brightest immigrants. I want to also talk about families, because people come with families. You have the principal beneficiary of a visa petition who's being sponsored for a green card, and you have a spouse, and you have children. If the children are born in the United States, that's great. But a lot of folks come in with their families. So when they come in on a temporary visa, the principal beneficiary gets the H-1B visa. There are other non-immigrant visas like the L-1 intracompany transferee visa or the O-1 visa, but let's focus on H-1 visas, which is the workhorse of employment-based visas. The principal gets the H-1B, the spouse gets the H-4 visa, and so does the child. The child can only remain on the H-4 dependent visa until the age of 21. And we know the backlogs are horrendous. So when the employer starts the green card process for an Indian-born beneficiary, the child, even if the child is 2 years today in H-4 status, the child will probably age out. The child is not going to be able to get the green card with the parent, because the child would have turned 21. There is a law called the Child Status Protection Act. I'm asked to give my language here. Is that for me?
No.
Okay. So the child will not be able to take advantage of the Child Status Protection Act, because by the time the date becomes current, when the parent is going to receive the green card, the child may have already crossed 21. So the child won't be protected. The age won't be protected. It's a very complicated formula. And when this child gets left out, and we have clients where the child is now turning 21 or has turned 21, they can't remain on this dependent visa. They could have gone to college on that H-4 visa, but now they have to switch to an F-1 student visa when they turn 21. And they're not protected by the Child Status Protection Act. And then it creates perils for the child and tension for the family, because the student F-1 visa requires the holder to have a non-immigrant intent, an intent to return back to the foreign country. And you can imagine, how can a child who's been here for their whole life be able to establish that they're going to return home? There has been a slight relaxation in this whole intent to return home, but still it is a hazard. So when the child is applying for a change of status to F-1, questions get asked. Show your intention to return home. They're silly questions, absurd. This child who now can switch to an F-1 visa and who needs to travel abroad has to now apply for a new F-1 visa at the consulate if they go abroad. There too, they are subject to this not abandoning the home country, which will be impossible for them to establish. So a lot of children who've successfully changed to F-1 status, who are in college, even if they have study abroad programs or internships, they don't use that. They remain in the US because of the hazards of and the perils of facing a denial if you apply for a visa overseas. Now, if the parent is like, still in the backlogs, not gotten the green card, this child has been left out. And let's say this child is now on an F1 visa, has graduated, then goes into a graduate program, gets qualified with an MS degree in artificial intelligence, is highly coveted in the job market, and now, has to get their own employer to sponsor them. Then there's an H-1B cap for the non-immigrant visa, only 65,000, and another 20,000 for people with master's degrees from US institutions. 85,000 can only vie for this H-1B visa every year. So most people don't get selected in this H-1B lottery system that's going to start in a few days. And so this child won't be able to get into the workforce through an H-1, will have to remain as a student in that F1 practical training. You can remain for 3 years if you have a STEM degree, but if you have a liberal arts degree, you can only have 1 year of practical training. And so let's say the child now gets into the workforce, gets an H-1B visa miraculously in the H-1B lottery. And now the employer loves this person because they're highly skilled. The child now has to start the green card process again. The parent's priority date, the employer who sponsored the parent, that priority date cannot be transferred to the child. Child starts all over again in this horrendous system of a 100-year backlog. So you can best well imagine what an unworkable, untenable, unhuman system this whole thing is. And we have to look at the human face of it. There's been a lot of emphasis on DACA beneficiaries, which is great. These are kids who came to the United States with their parents before the age of 16, fell out of status for no fault of their own. They deserve all the benefits, and they got deferred action, and they need to be in the pipeline for a green card and for citizenship. But you have the children of legal immigrants who are also in danger of falling out of status, or being in this never-ending limbo that will remain in this status forever. So I think I will stop here, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's a lot of questions. If any of you can answer in the chat anything that it's like too detailed or technical, but let's see. Sunita had a question. Sunita, you want to ask your question? Maybe Cyrus is the one to answer that.
Yeah, Cyrus, I wanted to ask, do we see a lot of children who have aged out of the H-4 status become undocumented because there are no other options for them? They can't get that foreign student visa or cannot get their H-1B visa after.
There have been a few cases, but I must say based on my experience, the parents of these students, and even these students, are very particular about remaining in status. They've always complied with the law, and that's the tragedy. And those who have fallen through the cracks because they couldn't get that change of status to F1, yes, they have fallen out of status. And we've come across parents who are desperate, and when that happens, a lot of parents actually send their children to foreign countries, to study and to start careers all over again, if that were to happen. But yeah, there are kids who've fallen out of status and who couldn't, were not lucky enough to get the F1 status, or even when they were in F1, they couldn't get the H-1B under the lottery, and then their F1 status expired.
I want to go to a question that involves the three of you. What initiatives are out there challenging this system? And is there any way to get out of this madness? Anyway, David, what's your idea about this? What needs to be done?
Well, David can go first, and I'll follow. We work together on this, but I'm sure Jack also has answers.
Yeah, anyone who can you can start, Cyrus. Just start. Go ahead.
Well, Congress can fix the whole thing. And these are small bore solutions. Yes, of course, we want more green card caps. And Jack has also alluded to more green card caps. But if it's politically fraught with perils and things, and they want to get some bipartisan agreement, there are ways to kind of do it. You can not count family members in the employment-based and family-based categories. You could also try to do it administratively. That can also be tried. It may be challenged in court. It was challenged in court in the DC circuit, but there are ways to kind of not count family members. And if you don't count, you only do unified counting, or count only one in each family unit. That frees up the visas.
Okay.
That's one solution, and Congress can easily fix it by clarifying INA Section 203D that derivative should not be counted. They can do it so quickly if there was bipartisanship. There are other ways to also do it. For example, you can allow, this is not the ideal situation, but you can allow people who are in the United States to file early adjustment of status applications, even when the priority date is not current. And by doing that, they can remain in the US, they can work, they can port to new employers, and their children can get the ages get frozen under the Child Status Protection Act. So
okay, let's
these
go
are
to
some
David.
solutions.
Thank you, Cyrus. David?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the point about exempting children and spouses of the principal applicants. If you had done that for the family-sponsored capped categories, you would not have seen this big increase in the backlog since 1990, because in some categories, it's 2/3 of the backlog is just spouses and minor children. So you wouldn't have ended up in this sort of disaster situation where, effectively the family-sponsored categories for many countries are gone now. I mean, you're just never going to get a green card in these categories for future applicants. So that's an important way in which to address it. I was hopeful that the administration would try to do it administratively and say, there's nothing in the law that prohibits us from adopting this interpretation. We're going to adopt it. And, if they get taken to court, they get taken to court. But, at least they would have tried to do something about this dysfunction in the system. But, they've decided not to. They got so many other things going on in the immigration system. This has not risen to their level of priority for taking a risk like that. When it comes to solutions, we talk about green card recapture a lot. I mean, this is it's a sort of fictional way of looking at increasing the green card caps, but look back at the cap space that didn't get used. And if you look at that holistically, in this last paper I did, we go all the way back to 1921 and say, all the caps since then, how many didn't get used? It's 6.3 million green cards have been wasted over the last century. And that would be a substantial improvement for the family-sponsored and employment-based backlogs. So that would require congressional action to go back that far. I think there's some arguments that have been made, including by myself, that administratively they have an option to do that when it's the administration who has, through their action, failed to follow the law by issuing the visas as required within the fiscal year in which they were allotted. Unfortunately, that's another administrative action that it's been pushed to the back burner. So there are some options out there, but it's certainly a big problem that requires congressional action.
Jack, thank you, David. Jack, I don't mean to cut you off, but we have 4 minutes left, and I wanna add something to the conversation. We all know where the immigration focus is right now. Yesterday, both presidential candidates were at the border, just emphasizing this idea that the border is out of control and people that come in through the border are a problem for the United States. How can we as ethnic media challenge that idea of seeing immigrants as danger? Because I'm getting it from my friends who are telling me, we're getting all these, dangerous people. There's this whole conversation going on. There's no way to fix the legal system if you have that kind of focus. What can we do? Jack, I don't know if you have any suggestions on that.
Yeah, I think we need to make sure people are aware of the benefits that immigrants bring to our economy. The Department for Health and Human Services recently came out with a report showing that refugees have a positive net fiscal impact. So immigrants pay taxes and they're adding to our labor force. And as I mentioned before, we have an aging population. We need people to work, to pay taxes, to support our elderly. So I think we need to champion the benefits of immigration. And there's a lot of research out there. And the other thing we can do is just educate people on how restrictive our system is. There is research that shows that that can change perceptions of immigration. And so that's why I love David's work so much. Why it's nearly impossible to get a green card and to immigrate into the United States, and his green card game. I think sharing those things widely can show people how restrictive our system is and awaken people to the problem.
I don't want to leave this briefing with a negative, idea that there's nothing that can be done. There's always something that we all can do. I don't know if David, you want to have a last word here, and Cyrus afterwards.
Sure. I just wanted to say, when it comes, you're absolutely right. The border has dominated the conversation. If the border is out of control, it's very unlikely you're going to see action on other items. I think the administration has kind of shown proof of concept with these parole sponsorship programs that it's created for Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. It needs to expand those to other countries and make them permanent. The applicants don't believe these programs are going to exist in 3 months, let alone in 5 years. So having those programs be expanded could get the border under control and also show people that legal immigration is connected to the border problem. If we allow people to come legally, then you're going to reduce the chaos they're concerned about. And it really is a chicken or egg situation. It's a catch-22. People don't want to increase legal immigration while the border's out of control, but they got to increase legal immigration to get the border under control. And so I think, the administration just has to lead on this and just do it and show people that it can be done. Cuban illegal entries are way, way down, over 90% down after they did this executive action. They can build on that and ultimately show people what a good immigration system could look like.
Cyrus, thank you so much, David. Cyrus, you want a last word too?
I echo David's thoughts. I think if the administration cannot push Congress to pass a bill, then administrative fixes aggressively can try to do it. So parole is one example. And what's good is that once you show that an administrative policy is successful, then Congress will someday bless it. So, one other is, as I mentioned, allowing people in the backlogs to file early adjustment of status applications. That can also be done under the filing dates of the visa bulletin, which I've written about with David. So there are administrative fixes. I think the Biden administration should also project the benefits that immigrants bring, amplify Jack's papers and thoughts, and start with the administrative fixes and then go to Congress.
Thank you everyone for being with us, and we really appreciate your research and the work that you do. we need this information out there, and we need to be very well informed about this before we can actually do our jobs as journalists. Thank you so much and have a wonderful weekend. Thanks.
Thank you.